That is a highly controversial topic.
It's not quite moral, but it is a theological explanation.
The idea of like apocalyptic literature is not that it's to be interpreted in necessarily a literal sense.
Yeah, I'm impressed by your very thorough research.
I just started thinking about this because, as you might imagine, nobody's ever asked me in church about Judas.
That's a fascinating philosophical discussion.
I think it's important to talk to them and find out what they believe.
The most common response I've gotten from people is, at last the church is doing what they're supposed to do.
Hello everyone, thanks again to those who are helping out on Patreon. The links are here and down below in the thingy. Once again, the questions are marked out on the YouTube timeline, so if there's a question in which you have a particular interest, feel free to skip ahead. This episode was a disaster. Way worse than the problems we had way back in episode 22. Hi, Otar. Here's a list. We're moving into the new house, which is not directly related, but did take up a lot of time. My main audio feed that we captured was unusable, so I had to use the in-camera microphone and clean it up to make it usable. My OS drive died, and I got it replaced and my PC working again, and then the data drive died. So I had to do data recovery, which was only mostly successful, and thus had to redo all of those audio fixes from before. Then I ran over a nest of yellow jackets in my lawnmower and was stung several times. That didn't really affect the episode, it just sucks in general. I hope you enjoy watching the video more than I did making it. And make sure you stick around for the end where I tell you 2 things you probably don't know. Hello and welcome to the What They Believe series. Today my guest is Reverend John Jackman of the Trinity Moravian Church of Winston-Salem. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Tell us about the Debt Jubilee Project.
Our congregation is in one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Winston-Salem, and it has a long history of assisting poor folks and so on. The regional emergency ministry, where you go to get food or help when you're out of money, started here in the basement of this church and grew and became a regional ministry that's independent. This congregation's had a long history of that, and it's part of their DNA. And one of the things that we noticed working with Sunnyside Ministry and some of the people that came to us for second mile assistance was a common thread of medical issues. Either they'd gotten sick and they hadn't been able to work for a couple of weeks and they were hourly. And if you're just barely making it, missing a week of work is devastating in the economy today. But then they'd end up with a medical bill, even if they had insurance, that was sometimes unpayable. And it might be, for a poor family, $1,000 bill is just impossible if you're just barely making it. This kind of built over the last 10 years or so that I just kept noticing this drumbeat. And I'd heard about a nonprofit called RIP Medical Debt, which was set up by a couple of guys who were in the debt collection business, and they knew the business inside and out. And after the Occupy Wall Street thing happened, they both looked at that and they said, well, we could do some of this stuff too, turn it around and buy the debt the way we already know how to do it, but instead of collecting on it, raise funds charitably, pay it off, and wipe it clean. And I had heard about this several years ago, and I thought, what genius idea, And the board was very enthusiastic about it. They said, this is right in line with our vision of what we're supposed to be doing in the community. So let's try it. And I have a really good board. They're not scared to fail. Their attitude was, well, we'll try it and maybe we'll fail, but then we'll do something else, And the first campaign was to raise $5,000. And with that, we expected to buy, and this sounds ridiculous, but $500,000 in debt here in Forsyth County. But that's what it auctions off for at one stage. And so that's what we expected. And we did not have $5,000 sitting around, so we had to, we just announced it to the congregation and said, anyone who wants to give, please give. And the word of mouth went really fast. And it's the unusual thing about it is everybody I talk to about it has a story. Either they've had a medical debt they had trouble paying, or they knew somebody in their family, or, so essentially everybody I talk to, I have to listen to their story first, and then they hand me a check. And it's kind of bizarre. Usually I have to work really hard to raise money. But this one has just been like, it just happens. And it's because it's a very common shared concern. Everybody knows this thing is, it's a mess right now. So we rather quickly raised the $5,000, and when we went, had RIP Medical Debt actually go to what's essentially an auction to buy the debt, they were able to buy $1.2 million, and so flowed over into the next county. And our board said, this is great, let's do it again. And we had interest from a number of other churches. We had a foundation that approached us and said, this is in line with we have a fund in line with this. Would you apply for a grant? And usually I have to go to them and ask if I can apply. And they came to us and said, here, apply for this grant. We're going to give it to you. And so the next round, we raised $15,000 and we're able to buy $3.2 million in debt and help 3,000 plus families in the area by wiping out their medical debt.
I read about your church in several media reports and on social media as well. And while I certainly support the effort, I'm not 100% sure the Bible does. And I'm referencing Matthew 3:6-3 to 6:8, I believe it is, where it says that you should pray discreetly and that charity should be done discreetly as well.
Right, yeah. It's not a match, in my opinion. And let me tell you why. Jesus is talking about individuals. And in fact, the way we're doing our project, the individuals are not taking credit. We have a number of donations that have come in that are anonymous. We don't publish who gave and who didn't give. So at the individual level, we're observing that. And I'll tell you, we had one donor who is not very well off, but during COVID, she was able to work remotely, so she didn't lose any income. She lives very frugally, and when she got the COVID checks that everybody got, she just put it in the bank. And when one of these campaign came around, she decided to give that whole amount to one of the campaigns. There I'm thinking about Jesus and the widow's mite, because objectively this gal didn't have that kind of money to give away. But the way she lived her life, she could. But she gave anonymously. The only two people who know who she is myself and the treasurer, because he had to deposit the check. And so our people are observing that. But as I mentioned, we didn't have $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 to do this with. So we have to ask people for donations. And so we did. Now, we also had no expectation that this was going to go viral the way it did. And that's been a very strange ride. Probably only people in the nonprofit business will even know the word eleemosynary, which is the technical term for seeking donations and charitable giving. But its original meaning was, in Roman times, was to make sure you were remembered well. It wasn't about being charitable at all. And so I think what we believe is that we need to do things charitably in order to help people, not so that we'll be admired or remembered in an individual way.
The Moravian Church was founded by two theologians that predated Martin Luther by a century. And much like Martin Luther, there were only two people in a much larger movement, and of course, only human. Is there any part of their writings from the time that you would disagree with now?
Sure, yeah. Jan Hus is not the founder of the Moravian Church. He was a Catholic reformer in Prague who preached in the common language. He'd been inspired by John Wycliffe before him, who translated the Bible into English, which was against the law at that time. he railed against the kind of abuses in the church at the time, which were pretty bad. I mean, their Catholic Church owned a brothel in Prague that was for the exclusive use of priests, even though they had vow of celibacy, and this was very open, and so it was pretty bad. He had a lot to rail against, but he was very much Catholic, medieval Catholic. He believed in transubstantiation. I don't personally believe in transubstantiation. And he believed in purgatory, and I mean, he was a Catholic. What he stood for was that the Catholic Church needed to reform itself and live up to its own principles. And that I agree with. You know, if these are your principles, then you need to abide by them. And that I agree with. I have a friend who's a bishop who maintains that Vatican II was actually the fulfillment of Huss's teachings, the opening up of the church and the reform of the church. And I think some historians might argue with that, but it's a good point to think about. But he wasn't a Protestant, and he was a pre-Protestant. Mm-hmm. His followers, the Hussites, there were several factions that had different beliefs, some of which were very apocalyptic in times kind of beliefs, the Taborites. There was a period of 30 years of the Hussite wars, which I'm knee-deep in research on, but most people know almost nothing about. It's a very fascinating but very bloody period. And several theologians arose at the end of that, one of whom was Peter Helchitsky, who, war is terrible, even if you win. You know, you look at Ukraine right now, even if they win, how many people have died, how many cities have been destroyed, and the Hussite wars were like that. They were devastating. And everybody lost somebody in their family, and there was just no real upside to it. And Helchitsky focused on the core teachings of Jesus, and particularly the Sermon on the Mount, and he maintained that Christians really should be pacifists, and that the war had been wrong. And that teaching attracted the folks who founded the Moravian Church, the Unitas Fratrum, in 1457. And so our core teaching at the beginning was very pacifistic. However, it also recognized from that period how differently everybody perceives things. And so they developed this idea of focusing on the essentials of faith and not arguing about the rest of it. And that, in fact, is what attracted me to the Moravian Church as a principle, because, I've had friends who were soup to nuts, and quite a few nuts, but and their life experience has led them to different perceptions of faith and what it means and the details that we all argue over. Those are defined in the Moravian Church as non-essentials. And so that became kind of core to the Moravian Church. In the period during the Lutheran Reformation, leader of the Moravian Church was a fellow named Luke of Prague. And he kind of defined this, he refined a lot of this into theology. He defined this as essentials, which were the actions of God to save us. Ministerials, which is the group of things that lead us to that, which would be the Bible and communion and things like that. And then what he called accidentals, but that's in the medieval philosophy term of accidentals, that we would call it incidentals. Things that don't really matter, the language that you use in worship, the kind of music, whether it's classical or rock or whatever, what your sanctuary looks like, the skin colors, everything else. All of that is non-essential and just is to be set aside and left to the individual. And so we have, even in our congregation, we have a full spectrum of both theological and political and other beliefs. And when we do it well, those people come together, worship together, support one another, respect one another, but still have their own opinions on all the divisive issues. And so that's kind of really core to what we believe.
Even in my conversations with some of the other preachers, they had mentioned a lot that everyone's a sinner except Jesus. Jesus was born without sin.
Mm-hmm.
Why was Jesus baptized if he was born without sin?
Well, it wasn't tradition because it was a new thing.
Well, it's starting to tradition.
Yeah, it was, John the Baptist started this as a symbolic washing. And I don't know. I guess my answer to a lot of these questions is I don't know. And I'm fine with that. Jesus said, John the Baptist said, oh, no, you should be baptizing me. And Jesus said, it's fine, let's do this kind of thing. And so it's never explained. And so I think one of the things I'm suspicious of, just theologically, is that I'm suspicious of people that have all the answers. And I'm suspicious of people who've reasoned out many stages of why this is true, because they could be making mistakes at every stage. And I'm much more comfortable with wondering about it and assuming that God knows, but I don't. I don't think a lot of people are not comfortable with that. My wife maintains that that's partially because of our school system, that we have tests and there's one right answer and you have to have the right answer. And there's this anxiety about having the right answer. And I don't feel like I have to have the answers. That's above my pay grade, and I'm quite comfortable with wondering about it.
I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer, especially if you don't know.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Make enough.
I don't want to pick on people, but I remember years ago hearing Jimmy Swaggart describe the New Jerusalem, and like he had the blueprints in front of him, and it's like, well, none of that's in the Bible, or some of that was, he took a little thing in the Bible and he embroidered it a lot. It's like, that's not what it actually says. So, where do you get this stuff? And I've just always been very suspicious of that.
I'd like to thank Reverend Jackman for speaking with me here today, and I shall do so now. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Here's the thing. If you're looking for a thing to wear, how about this? This is a kimono. It's a traditional Japanese garb and is literally a thing to wear. That wasn't clear enough. I really did mean that literally. The word kimono means thing to wear. Here's the thing. I'm a big fan of irony. In March of 2008, the University of Texas in San Antonio updated its student code of conduct, including the guidelines on plagiarism. The irony? It appears they copied those rules from Brigham Young University. They plagiarized their rules on plagiarism. Well, thanks for watching, and may the road rise with you.